Hi, and welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for our cloud providers in VMware. And today I'm joined by Laurent and Kaus. We're going to be discussing Sovereign Cloud and Caveonix, risk and compliance management and monitoring within cloud. So thank you guys for joining us. Laurent, well, let's start with you. Brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Hello, Guy. Very pleased to be connected today. I do enjoy this format. So I am Laurent Allard, and I'm leading the Sovereign Cloud program for VMware in EMEA.
Thanks, Laurent. And Kaus, welcome.
Thank you, Guy, and thank you, Laurent. My name is Kaus Foltenker. I'm co-founder, CEO of Caveonix, and Caveonix provides the solution for hybrid multi-cloud security, compliance, and governance. And specifically, you'd love to talk about how we are supporting sovereign cloud requirements of service providers and their enterprise customers.
Yes, let's just talk about the market a little bit first. Obviously, Kaus, we've been talking for a number of years on Caveonix and bringing Caveonix to our cloud providers. But more recently, how have you seen end customers with industrial regulated requirements and compliance requirements? How have you seen those regulated industries change in terms of their attitude to actually managing this?
We think about a confluence that's happening in the industry of cloud, security, compliance, and governance. And if you think about all of that, the governance and compliance is driving a lot of the spend that happens in the industry. And a lot of that has to deal with competitive pressures, but also regulatory pressures. And especially when you think about in Europe and Asia Pacific regions, as well as in the US at the state level and others, they're all really pushing for several aspects of data privacy, access to the information and control of the information to the consumers whose data is being gathered. And so customers are demanding that their data privacy should be protected. Regulations are demanding that data sovereignty has to be protected and data access has to be protected. And so that means a lot of aspects of implementations are changing to accommodate those requirements. And hence, ability to do this on a continuous and automated basis is very important, because every compliance regulations that's out there has now inserted over the last 5 years the requirement for continuous compliance monitoring. So you really need to track how the compliance's posture is drifting over a period of time, and then to be able to make sure that you remediate those very quickly on a timely basis.
So when we look at this, then what we're saying is we've got, and I'm going to ask you, Laurent, about the kind of changing regulatory environment. We've got this fast-moving, evolving, particularly in EMEA, changing regulatory controls being pushed out by the EU Commission and others, and then it's not a point in time compliance snapshot, checking the box, you're done. Data is growing. I think it's 23-25% year on year. Unstructured data, which is particularly difficult to keep an eye on, is growing as well. So that's kind of compounding this issue. So like you say, it's got to be something that has to be managed all the time, continuously. And you used the word drift. I like the idea of that. So you're drifting away. You need to pull back in. And when we look at the kind of proliferation of multi-cloud now and the classification of your workloads and your data within those environments, it suddenly becomes a very, very complicated thing to manage. So Laurent, you're heavily connected with everything that's happening in the EU regarding sovereign cloud and all of the legislative controls that are going on at the moment. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot of where we're at? I mean, it's August 2022. For anyone who's watching this a little bit later, what is the current climate looking like at the moment from a standards perspective?
What is very clear is there is a common understanding of the absolute necessity to organize, to have the framework, to have the standard, both from a regulation standpoint and from a technology standpoint, to address these absolute critical needs. data sovereignty is a core of a lot of different discussion, because data is a new asset for the e-economy. Everybody recognizes, and everybody recognizes the challenge we have on geopolitics, we have on competition, we have on cyber security, we have on losing control because of the unclassified and proliferation of data. We have on the volume. All of these drivers impose to have a very solid framework, both regulation and technology. So that, number one, we have a clear momentum of regulators, governments, industry leaders, both public sector and private sectors, to work and find a solution. Now, the second element is where we are as of August. As of today, we don't have a real solid framework. And the complexity of what we are talking here will require years before to address all of the different considerations. And we can't stop. We can't stop the business. We can't stop the transformation of the economy. So what we need to do is to iterate and develop some very concrete solutions. And nobody alone can address all of the needs. So we need also to develop the ecosystem, who combining the different resources, who at cloud service providers has got capability, who in terms of industry software leaders like VMware can deliver some foundation, who like specialists like Caveonix can provide very specific added value services, because this ecosystem will help to speed up. Time is running, standard is not totally defined today, and it will take time. So we need to speed up and we need to accelerate.
So we see, so you raise a really good point, and that, like, well, two really good points. One is that the policies are evolving, and it's going to take time for us to kind of negotiate with other foreign jurisdictions exactly what control is allowed and permitted. Also, the safeguarding procedures, right? We can't rewrite the book from scratch. We have to build on what is already there, and make sure that it's very clear the intent that we're trying to achieve by providing these new kind of layers on top. And the second one was speed, you know, and using the ecosystem that we have. No one vendor can do it all, and I think this is where, you know, VMware's got a great ecosystem of partners. We're kind of like the Switzerland of cloud in terms of you know, really not fighting other vendors and trying to be that single player. We are, you know, a multi-cloud company. So all that said, then the practical implementation of this, Klaus, you know, you live with this daily. So there's industry verticals, and industry verticals have very strict controls over data. How do our cloud providers, and how do, you know, potentially enterprises today, you know, in your experience, what you've seen, how are they dealing with this, and are they dealing with it in the right way?
Yeah, so it's a concept of a shared responsibility. So service providers have to provide the platform that's already secure, compliant, that allows customers to bring their regulated workloads into their environment. And then once they are in that particular environment, the responsibility of the service provider is that underlying infrastructure, the platform services, continue to meet those requirements. And then it's the responsibility of the enterprise customer is to maintain the application level requirements for compliance and data security and data compliance requirements. So it's a shared model. And the service providers who are very successful in delivering certain capability for specific to vertical industry, specific solution. So for example, if you have a financial services industry focus, then you will provide everything related to financial industry compliance requirements. So for example, there is FFIEC compliance for all banking sector in the US, OSFI compliance in Canada, CPS 234 requirements in Australia, MTCS requirements in Singapore, and so on, right? There's BSI C5 requirements in Germany, as an example. So all of these compliance requirements of the financial industry focus you could build as a service provider different environments that meet these requirements. Then there are some global industry compliance requirements, such as PCI compliance requirements. And those PCI compliance requirements for transaction-oriented applications that maintain and process credit card information. So if you defect, and then there are public sector compliance requirements, right? So like in the US, there's a FISMA, FedRAMP compliance requirements, ITSG 33 in Canada requirements, right? So there are a number of these requirements across Europe, US, Asia, and Asia Pacific regions. So service providers are creating these verticalized solutions that basically allow their platforms to be compliant with certain regulations. It takes time, it takes resources, it takes money to get that through the certification process. But once done, now they have a very differentiated offering that then customers feel very comfortable bringing their specific workloads that are need to meet these compliance requirements into that particular zone of compliance. And that makes it the full stack compliant. So infrastructure, platform, and application now is fully compliant. So this is how I think industry is trying to address the requirements of the various regulatory compliance requirements, providing this shared responsibility model.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something that's actually I'm monitoring a little bit at the moment. That is really the rise of verticalized cloud solutions. And one thing we've seen in the pandemic was quite interesting, you know, the shortage of resources. And now the people or the companies with the funding are actually building their own systems, their own CPUs and their own hardware, etc. That's allowing them to get ultra specialized into the vertical requirement. And when they're already delivering software, you know, Microsoft does Office 365 and stuff like that, they can then very much start owning a particular sector. And this is very, very interesting. I think we're going to see a significant increase in verticalized cloud offerings. And also, what I've seen in experience working with the cloud provider community is that there is a lot of specialization in cloud providers, but typically they tend to be, you know, 2 or 3 verticals that they will support. The majority of their business will be in one, the other 2 will be kind of offshoots. And really what I think maybe the cloud providers need to start refocusing on is becoming like experts in that one area, that one vertical, so they can then highly automate it, bring on tools and solutions like yourselves, and extend that with managed services. So from a customer perspective, Laurent, what we see is customers now with many clouds out there, and you know, even our government and our public sector bodies are using private clouds, cloud providers, CSPs, and indeed hyperscale clouds in some cases. How does this kind of fit then from a compliance perspective when, you know, we need to, from a sovereign cloud perspective, we need to be ensuring that the data that needs to be classified, you know, the most classified data needs to be within a sovereign boundary and isolated control and have all of the sovereign jurisdictional controls applied on it. How does this work when you've got this multi-cloud world?
Thanks. This is a key the key element to start is what are the data requirements according to the level of confidentiality, exposure to external jurisdiction or not, local residency, total protection, etc. All of these attributes need to be considered by category of data, and the data classification is the starting point. Each and every single company has got multiple type of requirement, highly confidential, mid and low. We can call restricted, confidential, and protected, or whatever name, but it's high, mid, and low. It's a general consideration of 3 levels. And each is adapted for a particular type of cloud solution. And the problem that we have is it takes some time to mature in the company to understand the requirements in this data classification. But when it's done, it's a complex journey to do the migration. And when the migration is done, it's a complex problem to manage it over time to be sure that we keep control according to the policies that we have done. And with a regulatory environment, the regulation is evolving. it takes 12 to 18 months for cloud providers to go through the process for certification of the next. So there is a level of complexity to anticipate and control. And this is where the limit of a manual treatment is clearly at the top of the agenda of the CXO, which is now we understand the needs, data classification with different category. We understand who are the providers for the different solutions. We can engage migration, but how we control, how we execute, and how we ensure over time. And this is where we need a very scalable and industrial framework to manage all of this life cycle, which is never ended because new data is coming and new change and new regulation is coming. And it's a permanent loop, which needs to be totally under control with an industrial framework.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. It needs to be automated. This is something that can't be done manually. So, Kaus, looking at data classification, as Laurent said, there's usually minimum of 3 levels of data classification, but sometimes many more, depending on which nation you're in. Service providers trying to help heavily regulated industries move to cloud need to be able to provide some level of assessment, I guess, against the current data that's in the estate across all estates. How does Caveonix approach this problem? Because obviously you can put in place the stuff to monitor and manage the risk and compliance for the existing estate. But before we get to that part, you've got this assessment exercise, and the successful sovereign cloud providers are helping customers with data classification. They have to, because you've got to understand what the exposure is. So how would Caveonix kind of assist in that scenario?
Yeah, so if you think about every one of those requirements of classification, as well as access, they all can be broken up across any regulations in 3 or 4 major categories. One is how the data at rest is protected. Based on the different classification, there are different levels of protection that you need to apply. There are some basic protections like data should be protected through encryption. Yes. What levels of encryption, what levels of data, at what data point? Is it cell level? Is it at database level? Is it storage level? Or all of the above? Different levels of sort of enforcements that can occur. The second one is who has access to that data, like who, when, where, how, and do we have information of auditing records of who access that information? Depending, again, your role and depending on the classification of the data, you should only get to certain levels of data access and be able to add, modify, delete operations, right, that you can perform on top of that, which itself should also be tracked and monitored and logged and so on. And then the third is about the data in transit. So again, the data in transit is not about just data access, whether it's encrypted, but it also depends on what applications are communicating to what other applications. So that if a mission critical application that is highly sensitive data is communicating with a non-mission critical application that may not have that high set levels of security, compliance, and governance controls applied, there is no data leakage that could occur when you go to that other environment, right? Aspect. So that data interdependency, application interdependency, and data flows, I think, are very important to that. And then final thing to all of that is different. At the end of the day, you still need to report this information to your auditors and regulators. And like in Caveonix Cloud, we support over 38 plus regulations at this moment, globally speaking, because our partners are global in nature, their customers are global in nature. And so that means, as you said, there are a number of regulations that are continuously evolving. They come with the Rev 1, Rev 2, Rev 3. They're always continuously updating to that new control families. And so we have a whole research team that just focuses on that so they can keep up with the updates to the regulations. Laurent mentioned that these changes have to be tracked and then implemented. And all of this has to go in sync and through automation, because again, if you do manually, it will take very long amount of time to launch your applications, classify, assess the data, classify the data, implement appropriate controls, monitor the controls. I mean, that takes a long manual effort to do that. And then finally, the assessment reporting also takes a long amount of time, which is very expensive. And when you are trying to digitally transform your business as a customer, you want to quickly respond to competitive pressures, market changing requirements like pandemic and endemic requirements and so on. So you want to be able to get to there very quickly. So if service providers can assist using something like Caveonix Cloud and other part of the ecosystem of solutions that in Sovereign Cloud exists, so that customers know how to classify, where to put that information, and those applications, where those reside and which controls are applied. So all of that can be implemented through automation and monitored through automation. That allows you to get to the production very quickly and also do it at a cost-effective rate. Right? So these are, I think, the things that we can help, and this is what probably is required for service providers to offer to their customers to bring to their business applications and digital applications to market very quickly.
Yeah, and it's so. Couple of things there. Then, when you're looking at the estate, you're not just looking at the, necessarily the on-prem kind of highly secure environment. You're looking at the whole estate because you need to analyze, like I say, traffic flows. You need to see if there's weaknesses in the estate. The Caveonix solution can do all of the assessment services against the industry standards and security standards that are out there. But standards, like Laurent was saying, are evolving very quickly. One of the key advantages here is, I think, what I'm hearing is right, is that you guys manage the updates to those evolving standards, and service providers just get the fresh content push, if you like, and instantly can see the impact or exposure they may have against that standard.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely right. So and just to add one point, excuse me, guys, just to add one point, I think because you mentioned the concept of sovereign cloud provider. I think the level of almost real-time alignment on the new regulation is critical for sovereign cloud requirements. We have the consideration of the public cloud from the past, where it was more capacity type of consideration of capabilities. So yes, storage compute was important, but now we are talking about services and total alignment on the data sovereignty, which is a critical element to make a choice for a sovereign cloud solution. And I think we will see emerging a series of attributes which will consider the level of basic minimum consideration for sovereign cloud when we do provide services for this particular target, because of the level of requirement of the data sovereignty. So I think we'll see emerging this ecosystem of delivering all of the best-in-class solution, because it's absolutely part of the definition itself of what it is. Sovereign cloud is not capacity, is service to protect the data according to the critical requirements.
Question is, okay, so we discuss what is required and why is it required, but how it can be implemented. And one of the things that we have to think about is it's a continuous process, like we talked about it. So it's a continuum that you need to assess. And, if you think about what's the first and foremost step of any kind of assessment, you really need to know what's there, right? So that means detecting what workloads exist, where the data based on their classification exists, whether it's the databases or in storage platforms, whether they're containerized, whether they're three-tiered traditional three-tiered applications, and so on. So all of that requires the part of the detect. The second part of that is to run the assessment. So part of our detect engine is to run those assessments. So every one of these controls that we talked about from different regulations, we have mapped to different testing sequences. And these testing sequences allow us to assess the infrastructure, the platform layer, and the application layer. And operating systems are using those from these virtual machines or containerized images on Kubernetes components that you may be using, or Tanzu Kubernetes Suite and those implementations as well. And so part of the detect is also run the assessments and also understand the interdependencies based on flows. So we are covering a lot here based on just the detection. So now you know who's communicating with whom, where the data resides, what current controls they're currently potentially meeting or not meeting, how the security implementations are assisting with those implementation, and compliance really becomes a hygiene check, right? Are you doing the things right? and that's what you're checking. And so all of that is in the detect engine. Once you have the detect engine, now the question becomes is how is represented to the customers in terms of the views. And part of the view is to really focus on the ability to predict where the issues are and where you should really focus on first, second, third to address those issues. Because again, when you think about a lot of those findings, not every finding can be addressed all at once, just because nobody has enough resources to address them. So that means prioritization to have minimal effort, maximum impact approach is very important. Second is it has to be quantitative in nature than qualitative in nature. So if you ask somebody, how is your compliance status with certain regulation? And you say, well, I think we're doing okay. I think we meet the requirement. Well, that's a wonderful answer, but you can't prove it that you're actually meeting those requirements. So a report is required. Secondly, to be able to track it over a period of time, if there's a drift, and then you bring it back from the drift to a more compliant state, that's what auditors are looking for, right? Audited. Myself used to be an auditor. And so part of my audit requirements was, tell me, how are you detecting any drift from your compliant state? And what actions have you taken, and prove it to me that you have taken to assist in bringing it back into the compliant state, right? So not that you will ever say that you can never, drift away from a compliant state. You can, but you need to also bring it back into the compliance, because change is constant in any environment. And that becomes one of the important aspects of monitoring. And then last but not least is, are there any actions that can automate, whether it's human-driven actions that can press a key and certain things happen, a set of sequence of events happen, or there are automated actions that can be taken. So for example, we integrate with all the VMware stack from vCloud Director to vCenter to NSX, NSXT. We collect the flows from NSX environment. We can create segmentation policies, zero trust policies, so that only certain applications can communicate at the same sensitivity level to other sensitive applications. Like these kinds of environments can be implemented by service providers or enterprise customers in those environments. So this continuum, if they can be managed, you can stay in the compliant state and secure state and a governed state on an ongoing basis.
It's quite a very comprehensive capability, and I can see, how this has been very successful. Really addressing that need to, like you said, detect, predict, and act. And when you've got the kind of the detection thing, this is running sort of 24 hours a day on whatever scope you've given it. It's already integrated into the VMware stack, so you don't need to do anything bespoke necessarily, unless you've got some weird stuff perhaps that needs to be integrated in. But that's kind of out of the box. So if you're a sovereign cloud provider today and you're using Cloud Foundation, or you've used a VMware validated design, validated solution now, and you've got NSX, vSAN, VCD, vRealize, whatever, this is going to be out of the box for you. I mean, this is going to be like literally plug it in, turn it on, put in some credentials, and off you go. And then, like you said, that prediction, what's really nice about that is, like you said, that you do get, I've seen them before, huge lists of like, this minute thing is out of compliance. Well, I'll address that later on. That's kind of really, really low in priority. And being able to provide that to the cloud provider or to the customer is going to be brilliant. And then the act piece, I just want to zoom in on here. So this can actually make changes then into the infrastructure. So you can actually pull that policy back in place by using the act kind of capability.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're using tags and other methods by which we are grouping assets, cloud assets, that could be storage, could be virtual machines, could be the network segments, so that you have an application-centric view. We firmly believe that at the end of the day, cloud assets don't exist just because they need to exist. They exist to serve a business application. And hence, you need to really take a view of, that's an application-centric view. Because then applications process the business reasons and business data for the customers. And it is the applications that are in charge of those, data and sovereign cloud implementation, why the sovereign cloud implementation exists. And so segmentation, policy mapping, execution, zero trust, aspects of securing and applying additional sets of policies through the NSX distributed firewall, all of those aspects you can do through a single unified console from Caveonix implementation.
And just to be absolutely sure to all the partners listening there, and Laurent mentioned it before, right? This is running in a sovereign, isolated domain, not connected to any SaaS solution, completely standalone, and does all of this stuff in its standalone way.
Absolutely, this is implemented within that environment only.
Yeah. Okay. So Klaus, just I guess one more question from me really is like, in your experience and what sort of successes have you seen? Is there anything demonstrable or quantitative you can give us in terms of results that you've seen working with cloud providers and accomplishing the deployment and ongoing kind of management of Caveonix?
Yeah, we have several such implementations working with service providers. So one of the service providers is IBM Cloud that has implemented IBM Cloud for Financial Services and IBM Cloud for Regulated Workloads. So we are the engine behind the IBM Cloud for Financial Services for really assessing the compliance controls and governance controls for FS Cloud. Same thing with regulated workloads, which is more broader than just financial sector. So that includes the government sector, the public sector, as well as the healthcare sector, utility sector. So we have customers from utility industry, retail industry. We have customers from healthcare industry and technology space. Those are using different kinds of compliance and compliance regulations, privacy regulations they need to meet those requirements. And those are implemented at different parts of the world. So we have implementation in the US, Canada, Germany, Australia implementations as well. So all of these things mean that the customers' service providers are able to now generate the revenues based on a differentiated offering that meets all the requirements of data sovereignty, data sovereignty control, specifically being demonstrated and validated. And then from a enterprise customers perspective, what they are seeing is streamlining of operations, saving of the cost, because now automation is actually running the assessments, providing the reporting, ability to demonstrate to the auditors that this is done on a continuous basis. So all of these aspects become cost savings aspects to them. So if you can get the scale for multiple applications that you need to deploy, speed at which you can get this implemented and up and running, and then able to demonstrate comprehensively how you meet all the different compliance control requirements and governance control requirements, then you have a perfect solution from what enterprises are looking for and what service provider can be offering to them under the sovereign cloud implementation.
Yeah.
If I may add one point, this overview is a great proof point that we are talking about added value services. We are far from looking exclusively on where the data is located. And when you look at the maturity of, that at VMware we have developed a maturity level at five level of maturity, but a lot of clients are discovering the journey of sovereign cloud. But what you are talking here, it's clearly the key pivot to move to the data-driven sovereign cloud approach, where all of these critical services are the one which makes the difference. Because at the end of the day, you need to control your data, you need to detect, you need to comply, you need to report, and it's much more complex than just where is my data center of my supplier. Okay, and all of these added value services will become absolutely mandatory to justify the classification of a sovereign cloud partner. So this is where, with our ecosystem and with Caveonix, we think that we can really speed up because it's operational, it exists now, and we can implement on top of all of the existing attributes of localization, local operations, immune for external jurisdictions. All of these considerations are key, but this is a foundation. Now we need to build on top all of the added value services.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, it's great to see that you get the infrastructure kind of under management straight away. That should be like the table stakes. But as you say, no, it's all about the data. It's all about the applications. And I imagine in some instances, Klaus, you've seen customers have got like a CMDB, and they've got their infrastructure associated with their applications, and everything's nicely laid out. But then when you actually deploy the solution and start really listening and understanding, there's suddenly flows from different applications. IP addresses are different. Lots of things are incorrect in ITIL and CMDBs. I mean, it's been a problem. So that discovery phase is great, understanding those applications, and then really you're in that data focused mode. It's then about, right, what is really important for me? Where is it? How is it protected? What is it interfacing to? Is it under the correct kind of compliance mechanisms today? Is it meeting all these compliance standards? So I think there's a hell of a lot of value here. So listen, I mean, in the interest of time, today's session was about just raising awareness of Caveonix. So thank you very much, Klaus, for doing that. And Laurent, thank you for providing your participation and insight as well. We're going to do another session because we've got to get into this. We've got to get into the product, and I want to have a snoop around. So we'll sort out another Feature Friday to do that. Just for now, though, Klaus, how can cloud providers or even indeed customers like find out more about Caveonix? Just from the back of this conversation that we've had.
Yeah, so certainly under the Sovereign Cloud page for the initiative, and I think on the ecosystem partners, we have a solution brief that we work together on to put together some of these core use cases and what we can support right away out of the box, as you said. So that's definitely a first place to go to get to see that solution brief, get that overview, listen to this podcast and in sort of the video blog as well. But the other part is that we are part of the VMware VCPP program. And so under the solutions guide, you can find Caveonix and Caveonix solution, and it's, how it is priced based on points, systems, and other is also available. So and also the internal sort of the VMware for VCPP program solutions sections has different provider related information how we can get in touch with us or through your VMware service provider partner manager.
Okay, great. And that's the product user guide, just to be clear, right?
Product,
so you're in there listed as a product available with points, which our providers are very familiar with, which is fantastic.
Yes.
Okay. Well, listen, guys, thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed chatting to you. It was a pleasure talking to you guys about, sovereign cloud. It's such an interesting topic. It's going to be a real evolution next 6 to 12 months. It's going to be moving fast. And I'm so glad to have, a great ecosystem partner like Caveonix and yourself, Klaus, supporting us on this and our partners. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Absolutely. Love to support the ecosystem. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.